I'm here today with Elina Xenophontos, an international law and globalization specialist, to talk about what's going on in Iran, the Iran protests, and Israeli and U.S. influence. Alina, thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you for having me, Wally. There's so much to discuss, so looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So let's just get right into it. Massive protests are happening in Iran. People are being killed. I'm hearing tons of different reports about the numbers. Can we talk about how did these protests start, and how did this foreign influence start to play a role, or has it always played a role?
So I think to understand why the protests began, you have to have a bit of a thorough understanding as to how the sanctions have operated, meaning the Western sanctions over pretty much since 1980, so since the start of the revolution, the 1979 revolution. So pretty much up until 2015, there has been consistently growing sanctions that have been placed by the entirety of the West on upon Iran. These economic sanctions have basically worked towards crippling the economy, destroying currencies. It generates mass inflation. It's basically, they've cut Iran from international banking systems, international financial systems, for example, such as the SWIFT over the years. They basically have imposed massive embargoes on their imports and exports, especially of oil, which is obviously the lifeline of a country like Iran, who's a massive oil exporting country. And the very premise of sanctions has been and remains as a form of economic warfare on a country that fundamentally impacts a civilian population. The idea is to wear down the economy and strain it so much that eventually there's going to be internalized discontent with people obviously becoming all the more exasperated at the fact that their material conditions are systematically being eroded. I mean, things like basic health care, having access to basic health care, food, being able to just get by, pay rent and pay your bills, pay your just basic daily expenditure. It's becoming all the more amplified, and the current establishment or the state in Iran is unable to manage the economic turmoil that the external sanctions are imposing on Iran. Now, in 2015, obviously, we had the GCPOA, which is the Iranian nuclear deal, and the whole idea behind that was to alleviate some of these sanctions to a certain degree. And this kind of reduced the impact of the sanctions that were still there, but they were far more reduced than what they were. And it allowed Iran to sort of reinsert itself back into the global market, global economic trade and commerce, which was a massive, I guess, opportunity for Iran to start bringing in money, wealth, and to allow itself to be able to offer to its people basic services that were being deprived up until this point. But come 2018, and there's a reason I'm saying all this, by the way, there's a reason I'm providing this historical context. Come 2018, Trump had pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal, even though, according to the International Atomic Energy Agency, Iran was abiding by the Iranian nuclear deal. They were abiding by it. So there was no reason for Iran to pull out of the deal, but they did. And so what happened then is that we saw this reimposition of US unilateral sanctions upon Iran, and secondary sanctions for other member states or countries around the world who were, working alongside Iran. Now, this has had, even that alone had detrimental economic impacts on Iran. I mean, there was a report that came out back in 2019 by the Lancet Journal, which, for those that don't know, is it's a peer-reviewed medical science journal, one of the best and most prestigious in the world, had published a very in-depth report basically stating how the U.S. sanctions on Iran is killing people, essentially. Tens of thousands, in fact, hundreds of thousands of Iranians have been killed as a result of the sanctions because it's affecting, medical supplies, medical equipment, not being able to basically meet the needs of a civilian population. I mean, they had even reported that basic things like bandages for specialized, wounds were not available to the Iranian public because of these sanctions. And that, in fact, the Lancet Journal had actually defined these sanctions as, quote, barbaric, because of the impact that it was having and the excess deaths that this was causing directly in Iran. And in fact, the Lancet Journal had actually, in that particular report that was published in 2019, had said that Iran at that stage was one of the few countries that was coming close to establishing universal health care. that has been a long-standing policy of the Iranian state since 1985, and it was completely sabotaged by the sanctions that was, placed by the United States, not just obviously following Trump in 2018, but also prior to that. This has had devastating impacts on the Iranian people. And, every time a new wave of sanctions actually comes through into Iran, it also leads to a situation where people end up purchasing an abundant amount of products in order to stock up, because they don't know when they're going to be able to have access to these products again, creating a very huge problem for the state when it is that they have to have access to, how to ration even basic goods and services and medical supplies, etc., which causes more inflation, greater economic sort of a crash inside of Iran. So you can see like the difficulties that the Iranian economy has had in being able to manage these sanctions and how detrimental they have been. And again, these are reports that have come out of the West. It's also been reported by the Human Rights Watch. And actually, the Human Rights Watch had found again in 2019 and 2020 that even financial institutions and banks and other pharmaceutical companies, but also other companies related to other basic humanitarian aid and food products, etc., were refusing to enter into trade with Iran because of these sanctions, even though at that particular point in time, what was considered to be as humanitarian aid was not sanctioned. However, because of international corporations and banks being so reluctant to work with Iran due to the sanctions, even that de facto wasn't actually getting into the country. And it was reported that, in fact, in Germany, there was even threats made to the legal status of citizens if they choose to enter into trade deals and negotiations with, Iranian companies when it came to, supermarkets or any sort of any company that was working with, somebody inside another industry inside of Iran, risked not just obviously being sanctioned, but also their illegal status. This was well reported by the Human Rights Watch as well, Amnesty International, like I said, the Lancet Journal. So this is something that is well documented. Now, what's very particular about what's happening now and what's really aroused the situation again is that even though in 2018 Trump had pulled out of the Iranian nuclear deal, other countries supposedly were still working alongside Iran, such as Turkey, Iraq, etc., and even EU countries, but although to a very, very, I guess to a very small degree because of the secondary sanctions that the US had imposed. In September of 2025, the E3 countries, that being the UK, Germany, and France, had actually triggered the snapback mechanism. Now, for those that don't know, the snapback mechanism was basically part and parcel of the Iranian nuclear deal, and that what it means is that if Iran is found to not be abiding by its nuclear obligations under said deal, allegedly, the all the universal no sorry the multi I guess universal sanctions on Iran, the UN sanctions, not just the US sanctions that Trump had reimposed in 2018, but the UN sanctions would be instantly put back onto Iran. And that's what happened. So the E3 states triggered the snapback mechanism. And interestingly, they did it right before the deadline. And what do I mean by the deadline? Well, the Iranian nuclear deal was established in 2015, and it was going to last for a period of 10 years, meaning 2025. And in October of 2025, the Iran nuclear deal was going to come to an end. And once it would come to an end, the snapback mechanism was no longer going to be valid, which means that they don't have the right to be able to reimpose these very brutal sanctions on Iran. And so the E3 states triggered the snapback mechanism right before the deadline. And so all the UN sanctions that oblige 193 member states to basically completely cut economic and financial ties with Iran were instantly placed back on Iran. And this basically unleashed a massive economic shock on Iran that now has to contend with basically, again, being kicked out, having its banks sanctioned, its oil sanctioned, all its industries eventually sanctioned, while simultaneously being kicked out of the financial financial, I guess, exchange system, that being SWIFT, meaning that they can't engage in international payments and transfers. And that instantly has had a very major impact on the economy in Iran, triggering obviously a lot of people to go out, like I said before, buying a mass amount of products. And there's a lot of distress. And this led to a 50% drop in the Iranian real currency, as well as massive forms of inflation. And right now, the state is trying to manage this economic chaos, because what is effectively happening to Iran is what I can only describe, and has been described by other experts, not me. I'm quoting what other experts have said. It is an economic siege. It is an economic siege that in many ways doesn't even defer to what Israel had done to Gaza, because you are cutting an entire country off of the international market, trade, and financial system, meaning that there's no way for them to get imports or be able to export produce in order to obviously keep their own economy flowing. And so the protests began by small shopkeepers inside of Iran, etc., who became very frustrated at the economic conditions that have been, are obviously now unraveling, fundamentally as a result of the snapback mechanisms. And so this is, however, the desired result of sanctions. It's a well-known, obviously, objective. The idea is cripple a country economically, asphyxiate the civilian population in order to create civil unrest, in order to topple governments that basically are in direct opposition, I guess, to what, to the West, or who are not in alignment to I guess Western imperialist objectives in the region, and of course more broadly. And I just want to make a note here and say one thing, that sanctions are actually technically illegal under international law, under the UN Charter, fundamentally because of the collective punishment on the civilian population, because of the deaths and turmoil that it causes. It's considered punishment of innocent people and innocent lives. And that's what's happening right now in Iran. And people are frustrated, and there are genuine grievances. However, and this is where it gets where it gets very particularly interesting. We are seeing reports coming out that within the protests and within the legitimate grievances and the protesting, that people are obviously coming to the streets. We had labor unions that were coming together, obviously, to protest their economic conditions. These movements are being hijacked by external actors. And I think obviously this goes back to your question. And this isn't some sort of, I guess, conspiracy that's been propagated by Iran. This is something that is echoed by Israeli media, Israeli intelligence, but also US intelligence and former intelligence. So we have obviously on I-24 News, I-14 News, constantly reporting that they have even gone so far as to say that these protests are not happening organically, that they are being manufactured by
Israel.
basically Mossad agents, that they're saying it openly on Israeli media. You have Mike Pompeo, the former ex CIA director, who had congratulated the protesters and, to quote, said, and all the Mossad agents that are standing behind them.
Yep.
You've had, again, Israeli media openly stating that they are directly arming protesters inside of Iran. And this is where we have to differentiate between protesters who are genuinely frustrated at their economic conditions and the rioters who are clearly becoming all the more compromised, who are armed, weaponized, and who are now in the streets of Iran, and they are killing IRGC personnel, policemen. Apparently, they've also killed children. As we've seen, we saw the 3-year-old girl with her father that was shot and killed. We have seen I think there was a firefighter who I saw that they had actually burned alive. So these individuals who are claiming they care for the Iranian people, who, I mean, this is supposed to be the Iranian people protesting for their well-being. How are these rioters helping the Iranian people by killing and attacking Iranian civilians who are creating a protest movement that is directly attached to their the economic, I guess, crisis that Iran is now in, and using that to attack the state, attack its civilians, but also targeting fundamental infrastructure, hospitals, schools, clinics, supermarkets, small shops of small business owners, who are the ones that are being most hit right now by these sanctions. And imagine, I mean, and this is the thing. what happens in this situation, and what we're effectively seeing, this is going to itself become any, this actually amplifies the economic pressure on the Iranian state, because not only now do they have to contend with the sanctions and how that's basically going to cause massive shortages and supply chain issues all over the country, but seeing these protesters, or rather rioters, destroy public property is and burning down vital infrastructure only means it's going to drain the resources that the Iranian state needs to even be able to uphold the country economically. They're actually worsening the economic conditions of the Iranian people, and this is just very specifically done in order to hollow out the economy and create such internal turmoil that then the West and Israel are able to hijack this movement and possibly try to either force the Iranian state to make massive concessions and to abide by the demands of the United States and Israel alike, or bring about such massive amounts of opposition inside of Iran that the Iranian state collapses. And then, in absence of any legitimate opposition, they will take advantage of that to try to establish. They will like to establish. I don't think it will work. A puppet state.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So I have so many questions regarding this. The first question I want to start off with is you mentioned these Mossad CIA backed rioters. I want to talk a little bit more about them. John Kiriakou, he's a former CIA officer, he said that a decent amount of them actually, the Mossad goes and finds Afghan migrants in Iran that don't have Iranian citizenship. They'll pay them because they're easy targets to find. They just need a quick buck. I was also reading something about Mujahideen, and then also ISIS has, a presence in Iran to a degree. The Iranian government tries to, and has been successful in trying to quell them, but the Mossad definitely takes advantage of them too. So what are the origins of these riders?
Yeah, it's. I think Kiriak was very correct in his interpretation here. So there's a lot of them, yes, that are agents, but there's also a lot of others who are, one, the fact that the material conditions in Iran have deteriorated so much, they are so desperate that they are seeking some sort of payment. It's a matter of desperation, so they end up working with and performing the, I guess, the agenda of Israel or the United States, etc., in order to receive some sort of payment or maybe to leave Iran entirely. There's always this kind of exchange that's going on there and taking advantage of very desperate people, because again, the poverty in Iran is quite substantial because of the sanctions. This is very easy to exploit. People's desperation is very easy to exploit. Then, in
Mm.
addition to that, there's also a lot of these nationalist movements inside of Iran. All these, like you said, all these other ethnic groups, and these very Western concepts of nationalism, and how that has been, I guess, really galvanized from, especially from the diaspora, to kind of push for this anti, I guess, state apparatus in hope to establish their own states, whether it's Kurdistan, etc., inside of Iran. So they become also quite easy targets to basically give them with the ammunition that they need to really wreak havoc inside of Iran. And so, yes, this doesn't necessarily mean that all the writers are necessarily agents. No, these are compromised individuals inside of Iran who are vulnerable due to ideology, which is, again, a lot of it is the consequence of the Westphalian notion of nation state, which is a very imperialist ideology and interpretation of what it means. Nationalism really is, and then obviously, again, exploiting the desperation that people have, and I will also say this: when people are as desperate as they are, and they maybe are unable to contextualize the economic realities of what's going on behind the scenes to bring this sort of economic desperation, again, they become susceptible. Because for the average working class person in Iran, all they know is that they can't make ends meet, that they can't get baby formula for their children. They might not have a full understanding as to what sanctions really means and how difficult it is for the state to be able to uphold even even a modicum of sovereignty. Like I said earlier on, I mean, when the fact that Iran was able and very close to establish a universal healthcare, something that doesn't even exist in the United States, that prides itself as the most advanced nation on earth, but that was completely destroyed by the sanctions. Imagine if Iran was allowed to succeed without sanctions, the type of prosperity its people would have probably been able to, enjoy. It would have been far less easy to infiltrate these populations and exploit their desperation, because there would be a degree of comfort that therefore also brings support for their, I guess, establishment. So this is how sanctions also work. It destroys an economy. It creates a desperate population that might not understand fully the complexity. Obviously, it's not everyone, but I guess a section of the population, and this becomes again another avenue of opportunism for these intelligence apparatuses. Because, like we said, I think it was a lot of reports that come out even 2 days ago where Trump had said that they were looking at non-military options, and this was covert operations, psychological operations. I mean, they're open about it. So you have psychological operations could mean using the internet media to galvanize the public, information warfare. And that's one of the reasons the IRGC, or rather the Iranian state, has shut down internet access, which is then framed by Western media as exemplary of the authoritarianism. But what's really happening is that they're trying to push back against the information war that is currently ongoing, and it's meant to infiltrate the minds of the Iranian people and further galvanize discontent. And so, this is the rioters can also be an extension of that, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
No, absolutely. And you know, what are the prospects looking like? Because we've seen what's happened in Iraq and Syria after you overthrow a regime in Iraq. I mean, it was completely shattered and ISIS went rampant. In Syria, you now have a very weak central government that's basically a naked state. I think within 20 minutes, actually, exactly 20 minutes after Assad was overthrown, Israel went on an airstrike campaign. Uh, I have a feeling that they would consider doing the exact same thing if the Iranian regime is overthrown. Massive airstrikes all across the country, basically making a naked state. So, what are the prospects of this succeeding? Where do things look like they're headed right now?
So it's very interesting. So the sanctions war is evidently working. I also want to bring attention to the fact that, let's remind ourselves, beyond the fact that the GCPOA, triggered back the snapback mechanisms, rather E3 states, we saw Trump also announce 25% tariffs on all countries that are going to continue to trade with Iran. This is obviously going to hit countries as well, especially like China and Turkey, who are some of their biggest trading partners. This is going to create another economic war as well on a scale that transcends just Iran now. But again, it's the economic war against China that the US is constantly pushing for all times, but failing. And then now the EU has also announced that in addition to these crippling sanctions, they're looking at imposing another, sanctions package, again, on the civilian population of Iran. So what I think is going to happen, they're going to keep the sanctions warfare, they're going to amplify it significantly. They're going to exploit the discontent by continuing to arm, rioters and bad actors inside of Iran, as for all the reasons that I formerly outlined. Now, will there be a major military campaign inside of Iran to try to definitely overthrow the current state? I would say I would say this. About, I think in the summer of 2025, there was a report that came out, and I think it was from the New York Times, but I'm not sure. And basically, the idea was, and what was echoed at the time by certain experts, is that what we're going to see with Iran, he had said at the time, is a policy that Israel has practiced inside of Gaza, that being mowing the lawn,
Yep.
meaning that every few months they're going to attempt to essentially bomb Iran, maybe you find some sort of excuse to bomb Iran, and in doing so, with the sanctions together to really strain the economy. Because obviously, when you're bombing key infrastructure or sites inside any country that doesn't have the resources to rebuild that up, you're straining their economy and their ability to maintain power all the more so. That's what the objective is. But they're not going to do a long-standing military operation because the United States nor Israel have the military capacity right now to combat Iran. We saw what the 12-day war did to to Israel. We saw what the 12-day war did even to American stockpiles. It completely depleted its THAAD missile interceptors by 25% in just 12 days, including obviously massive impacts on Patriot systems because of obviously as well Ukraine, as well as other major missiles that were used in this exchange. So that's why the Pentagon just back in September had actually even issued I guess a statement saying that they're going to try to quadruple the amount of missiles and air defense systems that the United States produces in order to meet the demands of not just the U.S. but also its allies. But multiple experts, including reports published by the Quincy Institute, among others, said that this is impossible because the U.S. doesn't have that economic base to do so. I mean, just for context, the U.S. used 115 THAAD missiles during the 12-day war. The United States produces 12 THAAD missiles per year. Imagine how many years it's going to take for the United States to be able to make that up. Now, Lockheed Martin has said we're going to try to, amp up the production. But how are you going to amp it up when you've completely deindustrialized? You don't even have the factory or the skill, the labor skill force to actually be able to do that within the next. It's going to take you years to be able to do. And this was also published by other reports by the CSIS, among others. So this is kind of ubiquitous knowledge, especially if somebody sits down to actually read the policy papers that are being published. So the U.S. and the Israel don't really have that kind of option to do like a long-standing military operation. But I do think that they're going to, do the mowing the lawn option, which is maybe try to find some excuse to hit inside Iran to put as much pressure on the Iranian, I guess, state economically, exploiting the hardships of the Iranian people. Will they succeed? I don't really think they will, because we also saw when we're looking at the protests, we also have to look at the other angle of this. There was massive pro-government protests that took place just yesterday in Iran. Millions of people have come to the streets. I mean, they were flooding the streets. And this is the thing, even those individuals that may have, concerns or might disagree with the leadership in Iran, at the end of the day, there is a very deep fundamental understanding in Iranian society that sovereignty is paramount, and it's a precondition in order to advance their own struggle and to push back against Western imperialism. So they will unite under one front to push back against this. And truthfully, the other aspect is even if the Iranian current establishment was to fall, what is the option? Contrary to what the Western media says, Pahlavi, the former, the son of the Shah, he's not popular in Iran. He will not be accepted. It's going to cause a massive public outrage. We're going to see massive violence erupt. There's really no opposition or, leading of a figure that's going to be backed and have public support in Iran. So we're going to have the same thing that we have in Venezuela, where basically there's an understanding that there is, to a certain degree, of popular support for the current leadership, that there's no real legitimate opposition that has respect by Iranian society, much like there's no legitimate opposition that has respect within inside Venezuelan society. And what they're now trying to do, the way I see it, is coerce um, the current establishment to capitulate to the demands of the West. And we've seen Trump basically say that, where he basically stated very overtly, things are going to get a lot worse unless you come to negotiate. And when they're talking about negotiation, what the United States wants is, we want to be inside of Iran. We want to come and see what nuclear capabilities you have. We want to take all the information. We want to destroy what we consider to be a threat. I mean, we're talking about the complete capitulation of Iran. So this is a very testing time for Iran. It has to remain resilient. I think it will, because frankly, and I think even for the U.S., they understand that even if the state of Iran was to collapse tomorrow, they don't really have a strong opposition that's going to be able to uphold itself inside of Iran. And if you want to say, okay, it might become a Syria 2.0, where basically you have the country ripped apart. I would actually say that in Iran, that's going to be more difficult to do, because if, for example, there's some degree of support, because unfortunately in Syria, everything has been divided according to these religious ideologies, and that has unfortunately influenced the public there. In Iran, I think that is very, very different. There is a stronger anti-imperialist sentiment. And like I said, the one figure that the West keeps pushing, Pahlavi, is very unpopular. So they won't be able to solidify any control, and you can't guarantee. And I remember reading this in one report. Even if this Iranian government was to fall tomorrow, you cannot guarantee that the next, I guess, establishment that is to be formed, or the next power to be established yet, you cannot guarantee that they're going to be pro the United States.
Yeah, no,
So
absolutely.
yeah.
I was thinking that, I mean, I was saying it earlier. I was like, we don't know if we're, all of a sudden the regime is fallen and we see ISIS flags pop up all over across the country. Like, we really don't know what could happen. There's so much. There's so many different forces at play there. Alina, thank you so much for joining. Where can people find you and more of your work?
Oh yeah, you can find me on my Substack, on my Patreon, where I publish some of my own videos, some longer than others, also articles. I do have my own YouTube page, although I haven't used it too much but I am planning on using it a bit more. I do have some videos there explaining things like in-depth analysis of tariffs and even ongoing geopolitical events. And on occasion, I do also appear as a contributor on Colonial Outcasts. And also, for those that do use social media, I do also do a lot of extensive writing on my Instagram page.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.